When it comes to weapons in D&D, not all of them were created equal, and many are considered to be mechanically subpar. On top of this, the rulebooks don't provide us much detail on these weapons, leaving us to fill in the gaps of how our weapons look and feel. Due to this lack of information, I'd like to go through and examine all the weapons of D&D to answer: what is this weapon, both in history and in D&D? How is it different from the other weapons available? And does it need to be made better, and how can we do so? For our last video on simple ranged weapons, let's examine the sling. The sling is a ranged weapon used to throw a blunt projectile, typically made of stone, clay, or lead. It's generally constructed with 2 retention cords, leaving a small cradle or pouch in the middle for the projectile. The slinger would place either a finger or their wrist through a loop on one end of the cord and hold a tab at the other end between their thumb and forefinger. The slinger would then swing the device in an arc, releasing the tab at a precise moment to loose the projectile towards the target. Historically, the sling was a weapon and hunting tool going back as far as the Neolithic age, though it's likely to be even older. The biodegradable nature of slings, coupled with the fact that they were a lower status weapon, has meant that few are preserved in archaeological findings. The oldest known surviving slings that we have today were found in Peru, and were carbon dated to around 2500 BC. Ancient slings have also been found in Nevada, as well as the tomb of Tutankhamun, showing their widespread use by ancient humans across the world. While archaeological findings may be sparse, we do have many artistic and written accounts of slingers, from the Assyrian and Egyptian artifacts to the columns of Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, and even on the Bayeux Tapestry. Among those accounts, the Roman historian Livy mentioned the most famous of ancient slingers, the Balearic slingers. Often hired as mercenaries due to their skill, it's said that Balearic children were not given bread until they achieved their first hit with the sling. Balearic slinger mercenaries were employed by Carthage during the Punic Wars against the Roman Republic, but after the Romans conquered the Balearic Islands around the 100s BC, these famous slingers accompanied Rome's legions against the Numidians and Gauls. As a weapon, the sling had many advantages that made it stand out over the other weapons of the time, such as the bow or javelin. Ancient sources say that a trained slinger could lob a stone in excess of 400 meters, with some ancient scholars reporting that a sling could match the range and effectiveness of a compound bow. On top of their reported range, slings were also light to carry and cheap to produce, both in the actual mechanism and in the ammunition. Stones could of course be picked up and used at almost any battle site, though many militaries also stockpiled lead sling stones for use during offensive or defensive campaigns. Sling bullets were also reported to work well against armor, causing internal injury and blunt trauma through their high-velocity impact. As cultures transitioned into the medieval period, the sling was less prominent on the battlefield, but it was still used sparingly. In Italy during the 11th and 12th centuries, slings were still a fairly common weapon, especially during sieges. One such example was during Frederick I's use of slingers during the siege of Tortona, where they suppressed the garrison with barrages of stones while the rest of his men built siege engines. Slings were also favored by the Spanish and Portuguese against the light and agile Moorish troops. In the Americas, ancient civilizations such as the Inca Empire used slings as part of their resistance against the conquistadors. Historian Charles C. Mann quoted a conquistador as saying that an Incan sling could break a sword in 2 pieces and even kill a horse. The Chamorro people of the Mariana Islands were also so competent with the sling that the almond-shaped emblem on the flag of Guam is meant to represent the slingshot stones used by the Chamorro people. After the advent of gunpowder weaponry, the sling largely disappeared from military use, but it found a new home as a weapon of opportunity. In the period between World War I and World War II, international brigades of the Spanish Civil War would use slings to throw grenades at their enemies. Further east, when the Soviets invaded Finland in 1939, Finnish soldiers would use sling-launched Molotov cocktails against Soviet tanks. In the modern day, classic woolen slings are still used by nomads and Bedouins of the Middle East to ward off jackals and hyenas, but outside of that, traditional slinging is mostly practiced as a recreational hobby, with some competitions and leagues popping up across the world. In D&D, a sling is described as a cord made of leather or fabric, with a pouch to hold a projectile. While they could produce severe bruising or even broken bones, a sling in D&D is not as powerful as a bow, nor could they be launched as far as a crossbow. Present since 2nd edition, older versions of the sling would cost between 5 copper and 1 silver, weighed 450 grams, and dealt 1d4 bludgeoning damage. In 5th edition, the sling costs 1 silver piece, has no listed weight, deals 1d4 bludgeoning damage, and has the ammunition and range weapon properties. Compared to the rest of the ranged weapons in D&D, the sling is a really unique weapon that has very little impact on the game, leading some to question why it's even an option. Its cheap cost and non-existent carry weight make it great as a concealed backup weapon, but it still only deals 1d4 damage when it hits. Furthermore, while its normal range of 30 feet and long range of 120 feet is better than thrown weapons like the dart, the sling's range is still far lower than the short bow or light crossbow. On paper, that seems to be a pretty bad weapon, right? Well, the sling is also the only ranged weapon in D&D that deals bludgeoning damage, which makes it good for targeting monster vulnerabilities or overcoming resistances to other types of damage. Since its ammunition is just rocks, you could buy a bag of 1,000 ball bearings or scrounge rocks off the ground, making you never have to worry about ammo ever again. Plus, if you're a druid, slings are the only non-thrown ranged option you start proficient with. Why you would choose to use a sling instead of just using your wild shape or your spellcasting, I have no idea, but it is technically possible. With all these different factors in mind, the sling is a low-cost, low-weight, low-damage, low-commitment weapon. It seems to fill the same role as the club, working as a peasant weapon that all but the poorest of player characters should replace as soon as possible. Even with the benefits I pointed out, though, you really can't call the sling a good weapon, and there's a lot of things that would need to be done to make it viable in D&D. So, the sling occupies this weird place in the weapons of 5th edition. Outside of its niche use cases, the majority of player characters have little to no reason to ever even pick up a sling, let alone use it. However, what if, for the sake of story or roleplay, you did want to use the sling as your main weapon? Maybe you just want to roleplay as a halfling named David, slinging stones to knock out the Goliaths that you face while adventuring. Or maybe you're a character that wants to save as much money as possible, and as such, they are only using a sling for economic reasons. For characters that want to use the sling, they're going to be wielding a weapon that's mechanically worse than any other option available to them. So, let's take a look at some potential fixes to make the sling more viable and fun to use in D&D. My first suggestion is to allow the sling to critically strike on a natural 19 or natural 20. While the historical sling was not the most damaging weapon available, it could still break bones, dismount a knight from their horse, and cause severe internal damage when flung by a well-trained slinger. If we wanted to represent this lethality in the game's mechanics, we could increase the chances of critically striking with the sling, showcasing that a trained slinger can deal more damage, but only if they hit someone in a vital spot. This makes up for the sling's low 1d4 damage dice, while also making it a viable option for classes that want to stack damage on top of critical strikes, such as rangers and rogues. As with anything regarding crits, however, it's up to the dice how often this occurs, meaning that user experiences with the sling may still vary. My second suggestion to make the sling more viable in D&D is to add a weapon property that more explicitly allows it to use improvised ammo types. For certain types of thrown equipment, such as vials of acid or alchemist fire, they can typically be thrown up to 20 feet away, which is a relatively short distance that leaves the thrower exposed to melee attacks after their turn. However, if the sling could be used in conjunction with this equipment, vials of poison, acid, or alchemist's fire could be thrown up to 120 feet away, greatly increasing the range and effectiveness of these pieces of equipment. This not only rewards characters who purchase or loot these pieces of equipment with a better way to use them, but it gives the sling alternate ammunition that can be used to make it deal more damage. Now, technically, any game master could already implement this in their games right now. I'm sure there's some players out there who suggested it already. My suggestion is just to make it more explicitly clear within the rules of the game that the sling can be used with these different pieces of equipment to increase their effective range. My third and final suggestion to make the sling more viable is to add Pathfinder 2nd Edition's expanded critical effects they have for slings. In Pathfinder, when a critical strike is rolled with a weapon, that weapon's group adds an additional effect onto the attack. For slings, this effect forces a fortitude saving throw by the target against your class save DC, stunning them if they fail. In terms of 5th edition mechanics, this might look something like: on a critical strike, the target must make a Constitution saving throw, with a DC of 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your dexterity modifier. On a failure, the target is stunned until the start of your next turn. Considering that the sling is the only ranged weapon that deals bludgeoning damage in 5th edition, adding this critical effect would not only give the weapon some utility in its critical strikes, but also match its historical effectiveness in the ancient world. The stunned condition in D&D is nothing to scoff at either, incapacitating the creature, restricting their movement, and granting advantage on attack rolls against it. The fact that this only occurs on critical strikes is what keeps this ability balanced, but a good crit at the right time could stop a creature long enough for the party to either finish it off in one fell swoop or try to make a swift escape. The one downside of this suggestion is that it would overlap with part of the Crusher feat, but I feel that having this stunning critical effect would be far more impactful for the average player than that one line of the Crusher feat. All that being said, these are just a few of my own ideas on how to improve the sling in D&D. If we leave it as it is right now, the sling would likely remain an overlooked, underused weapon option. But if we implemented some or even all of the suggestions I put forward, it can become a utility-based crit fishing weapon that can stun enemies with a well-placed hit, then be able to follow it up with a vial of acid or fire while your allies close in. Ultimately though, all these changes would seek to make the sling more fun, more rewarding, and hopefully more usable as a ranged weapon. But with that, we come to the end of today's video on the sling. A prominent weapon in the ancient world, the sling in D&D is left lacking with how little it offers to players. By tweaking it to be better for critical strikes, all while increasing its general utility on the battlefield, the sling will likely remain a niche ranged choice for players. However, characters who do choose to use it will feel like they're still contributing to the party and feeling useful in combat. What I want to know is, what do you think of the sling? Do you think it shouldn't exist as a ranged weapon? Did you like some of the suggestions I put forward, or did you have your own ideas on how to make the sling viable in D&D? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description. If you want to support the server, you can also visit our Ko-fi link in the description to leave a one-time or recurring donation, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.